वेलकम गाइस वेलकम शुरू करते हैं आई थिंक all classes are lined up now, so let's not waste time. Today again we'll be continuing with the geological aspects of slope stability analysis. Last time we were discussing about what kind of surveys that are done. So last time we discussed something about uh, how when the field visits are planned, how the planning is done, what are the steps involved, the pre planning stage or reconnaissance stage where we go through the available literature, right? There is stage where optimum path is obtained, optimum path is decided so that most of the data that is obtained is representative or well distributed throughout the field, right? And then we do field investigations. We were seeing how some of the techniques or some of the simple ways in which uh, field investigations were done, right? But I think we lost internet connection last time. So what I will do is I'll very quickly go through that part again, maybe in 5 minutes or so, and then we'll move ahead. So the purpose of this kind of knowledge or this kind of things why we are studying here is basically to know what to expect or what kind of data is collected when we go to the fields, right? So today what we will be seeing again is some sort of what are the observations that we make in field. We includes us as slope engineers as well as what the geologist or in perspective of geology, how things are seen, right? How the samples are taken, or in that sense, what are the different ways in which a site can be basically mapped, or the details of that site can be known either by just physically observing or by using certain heavy equipments or certain technical equipments. What are those? Which are these? So today we'll be seeing two main aspects of that, or two or three, whichever possible. So geological field we were already discussing, so we'll do that. What kind of geological field studies are there, or generally what all it encompasses, what all can be seen, and in we'll also learn something about what are the geophysical studies. So geophysical basically uses the physical properties of these the rocks or the soil or the ground basically in order to understand its properties. So we'll discuss that, what are the geophysical studies and various kinds. We'll discuss some of the kinds and how they are done, what are the criteria and so on. And if possible, we'll also cover today some aspects of geological mapping. So uh, these things are even though quite intrinsic part in a geological study, but it's not very deeply understood in terms of mining or mining engineering. And that's why many times as a mining engineer, we fail to understand what is actually going on inside. And that's very important, especially in terms of slope stabilization work, because when we go for the slope, what we see is just the external part or the outer slope that we see. But what decides the stability of the slope is almost a major portion of that decision making, or the effect on the stability of the slope is due to the what is inside these rock masses or inside the ground, right? And to understand that, we basically have to understand some aspect, not all, but some aspect of what goes on inside, and how we can come to know what is going on inside. So what goes on inside, you have already studied in your basic mining geology. What kind of rocks are there and what kind of discontinuities are there. We also discussed some part of that. And apart from naturally occurring things, what are the some anomalies that can happen? Apart from the idealistic rock type, what can be non-idealistic scenarios? And in order to understand those, we have to go through many types of studies, many type of mappings. And what you will get as an engineer is those reports, maybe finally. But what we need to understand is how these are taken and what data are we seeing in them. So that's why very not in very much depth, but at least on a cursory note, we must be knowing these things. So I always used to say that even my professors, some of them used to always say that mining engineer is jack of all trades. So we must know these things. It's nothing like mining engineer should not know geology or he should not know electrical or electronics or anything. Everything that is involved in mining, we must know. So, and just starting to that, we saw last time how what are the three steps, major steps of planning for a field trip in a scenario where we are planning for a field study in terms of slope stabilization or slope making or slope monitoring, whichever the case may be. So the case may be for designing a new slope. The case may be for seeing the conditions why a slope has failed, or the case may be to even judge the stability of the present slope. That is, for now it is stable, but we may have to do certain study to confirm that and how it will behave in the future. So for all this, the various field studies are conducted, and uh, most of them can be basically divided into three parts. And uh, the primary was we discussed about the reconnaissance or the pre-planning stage, where all the reports that are generated, all the reports for nearby field sites and all, they are collected, they are studied. Route selection, as we said, it was based on what is the optimum path of physical surveys. Like we can't measure each and every point of the slope, right? It is physically impossible. So how to plan that, which spots to basically focus on, which line of surveys to take care of, which path basically to take care, route to take while surveying, so that the maximum area can be represented by those surveys, right? And the actual site investigation, which we will discuss. So one thing we were discussing that how there can be many biases. Human bias we were discussing. We can have each and every one of us have certain biases towards what kind of readings we are taking. We took an example of how 45.5 can be 45 for one and 46 for another. And when these kind of biases basically pile up, they create a disconsistency in what we basically record. So that's why if certain surveys that are done, the physical studies on the ground that are done, these are generally preferred by either a single group, the same group that is doing that study, or a single person if that scale is less or a small area is to be done. And uh, that's why it is important that we that person does understand what he or she is taking care of, or the what he or she is recording. So we were seeing what kind of various geological field study equipments are there. We were seeing what are the some of the equipments like hammer and chisel. So even we saw even by mm, estimation of how hard a material is, or how easily it breaks, or how easily it is indented, we can actually give an idea on how what kind of strength that material can have, right? So we were seeing these examples that how these categorizations of soil and rocks are done. These are basically just representing this subjective study, like how a specimen breaks requires many blows of geological hammer, requires more than one blow of geological hammer, or it is indented by a thumb, or it is scratched by a thumbnail, or so on. So these are all subjective terms. My thumbnail and your thumbnail will be different, right? My strength for striking one blow of hammer and suppose someone else is strength to do the same will be different. And that's why, again, the point comes that why only a single person should record these readings, or a single group should record these readings, because uh, I may classify that rock as a very strong rock because I have less power, and I take maybe 5 or 6 hammer blows to just break that rock. Or someone, few guys might have much more power, and you can hit it and break it at one go. So that same rock has two different meanings for me and you, right? So that's why, again, the point comes that why a single group or same group should be basically taking these readings, right? Others, we were seeing that how the joint orientations and the joint directions, dips, and all can be measured. We were seeing some details about that. We were seeing that how apparent spacing is different from the real spacing. Like there is the concept of apparent dip, with the same concept of apparent spacing is also there. And why it is so that because generally we can't always see the real spacing that is there, because we might not be able to see get the exposed area along the strike or along the real dip direction, right? So what we get is basically in a apparent dip direction, and due to this kind of exposure, we actually get some different values. Now, knowing the actual dip direction, actual strike, actual angle of dip, and the apparent spacing, we can quite easily convert those values into the actual spacing values. So this kind of corrections are applied. So the Terzaghi was the first one to basically give certain equations in this regard, and that's why these kind of corrections are called Terzaghi's corrections. Uh, Something to basically understand how both things are different. That's it. We were also seeing how weathering plays an important part. One example, when we were doing the limit equilibrium method, we tried Hook and Brown failure criteria in one of our examples, right? And in that, we saw how even though the intact rock might be quite tough or quite high strength, due to the weathering, due to the joint properties, due to the blocky nature, or due to so many other basically um, discontinuities or geological features, uh, there was apparent reduction in strength or the total properties of that material, right? So in terms of mechanical aspect as well, the rock mechanics aspect as well, all these physical phenomena like weathering, like the possibility of a joint, presence of inter interjoint material and water and so on, directly affects the properties of the rock that we are well aware, right? So even weathering actually can does directly affect, and that's why it is when survey or a field visit is done, we also see what kind of weathering is there on the rocks. In general, these are categorized into certain categories, again based on subjective inputs. So what is visible, no visible sign of rock material weathering can be the highest or the freshest grade, and totally turning into fragile soil, residual soil, like all rock material is converted into soil, can be the last stage, and many intermediate stages of basically weathering are there. So soil also is basically weathered rock, right? It's uh, with large amount of time and large amount of weathering. That's what creates the soil. Uh, so that's why weathering also is one of the recorded parameters, one the noted parameters when we go for a geological kind of studies, right? We were discussing last time when I think we were cut off, but we were discussing about how we measure the roughness. So roughness is measured by something called a roughness comb, or in technical terms, it's called a profilometer. It's uh, it's uh, it's a device that has these needle kind of a structure. So they are very thin needles, and these are all equal in length. Total length of each of the needle is same, and these are constrained by this entrapment so that only one direction movement is possible. So, being equidistant and being constrained in this direction, if it is pressed against the surface of the rock, basically it creates that indentation and records that profile of that rock. So, how rough it is, and so on. So, the basically the thickness of these needles will decide how accurate we are measuring the roughness of this rock. If these are thick needles like 1 mm or more, there will be certain indentations, like on the right side you can see this is the rock profile or the rock feature, and what record is being made on the comb is basically something like this, because the in minimum thickness of these needles are a bit larger. If it is slightly smaller, the relief feature will be better held, and so on. So that's why, based on what kind of relief we want to see, or what kind of uh, material we are measuring, we basically change the uh, we basically change what kind of thickness a needle has. Okay, so how do we convert this when we get this profile to a actual roughness index? So there are certain formulas based on what kind of thickness of these needles it is there. So 0.25 mm, like quarter of a millimeter, to 1 mm. There are many, and based on that, there are empirical relations. So these, do remember, these are empirical relations. Empirical relations generally are cannot be derived generally. Again, empirical relations are something that are equations that are generated by various trials and various experiments, and basically a series of regression analysis is performed to find out these equations. So for suppose for a 1 mm comb, 1 mm thickness needle comb, we will have a joint roughness coefficient as 64.22 Z2 coefficient minus 2.31. And the Z2 basically is defined by this. So 1 by M, M is the total number of needles, right? Delta X is the thickness of the needles, and basically yi plus 1 plus yi, basically the the square of these two distances, right? What they are doing is basically this square plus this square by delta x ka whole delta x ka whole square. So this is what they are doing. They are basically averaging these distances per unit thickness. They are summing them up, right? And they are taking the square root of it. That's the whole Z2 coefficient. And by some empirical relations, they just find out these roughness coefficients. Previous to this kind, there were general roughness profiles that were decided. So 0 to 2 profile like this, various different profiles were decided based on the scale. And if the previous method was simply to try and match what kind of profile you get, or the profile that is there on top of the surface of rock with these existing profile sets. So whichever matches closely will be representative of that roughness coefficient. Why roughness coefficient is important? Roughness again dictates how much friction there will be, right? And what kind of movement can happen. And also it is important parameter in various indices we will be seeing later on. So joint roughness coefficient is important index in finding the Q value and in that other geological indices, which actually is very helpful in deciding what kind of rock it is, and in extension, suppose what kind of support there should be in that type of rock. So one of the factors is joint roughness coefficient. One of the factors is the number of joints. One of the factors is joint spacing. So all these, one of the factors is how much water it is. The water coefficient is there. So all these small coefficients basically combine to find the that indices, and those basically help us finally in deciding what type of rock, and like an extension what type of support can be put. Uh, all empirical relations, because again the study is being carried out from so long and from with so many experiment sets that are done. So all these are like empirical relations that are being developed and quite accurate to much degree, but again changes from place to place. So we'll discuss that when we come to the material properties of the rock mechanical aspects of this after the geology part. But again, we have to know what it is and how it is done, right? So moving on, this was about.
Thank you, sir. Hello, sir.
Yeah,
Sir, this is Prabhu, sir.
yeah, Prabhu.
Sir, I think in this formula of Z2,
Z2.
Z2, that
Yeah,
means
yeah.
the formula of Z2 within the summation y I plus 1 minus should be there, I think, because in the roughness the difference between the next and the previous height should be counted to find Z2, right?
Actually,
That should be the
it's a correlation with the comb, Prabhu. What they are doing now, they are basically putting this comb, and then they are finding these sites. I understand you mean should be a difference between these so that we find out how the average length changes, right? And
yes.
I
So
think
how it is
it's
changing, the difference
right,
should be counted, right?
right.
So the next one
Uh,
minus the previous one.
that is
So
true. That is true.
I think
Logically, it should be like that. I
it
will
should
also
be
check
minus.
again. I will also check again because this formula I found from the comb website only. So I put it there. But yes, the actually some of these empirical relations like there was one formula I saw where this difference was there, but what they did was they didn't and like on the denominator side it was an average taking, like why this plus this by this, something like that, by 2. And here what they have done is they have basically given a gradient change, like per unit change in x direction, how much changes in y direction. But again, I will check. It's a valid point actually. It can be negative, but again, maybe it's because of the because they are basically taking the distance between the this comb edge, this section and the needles. So maybe it is true, but again, I will check. That is true. Like it should be, it can be a difference part also. Let me also check and get back to you. Maybe. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Let's move ahead. Uh, so this was regarding geology. What kind of some of the equipment, some of the tests that are done, some of the observations basically that are made when a geological field trip happens. And uh, apart from simple observations, oftentimes these are just limited to the type of rock, the on the surface, the joints that are visible on the surface, the roughness that is visible on the surface, and so on, right? So more often than not, it is just a superficial observation, and a maximum to maximum, what they can do is basically dig some few inches of rock or soil or break the rock and see what's going on inside. But in most of the geological field studies, these they don't go beyond a certain depth, or they can't basically go beyond certain depth physically, like going from place to place and doing it if they don't have dedicated equipment. So when we want the information that is inside the ground, there are many other methods to do that. There can be a simple method that we dig some cores like rock samples that can be taken like. So there are methods of drilling inside the directly vertically drilling inside and taking out the cylindrical samples and analyzing those. That is a most traditional way of doing it. Now, we will also discuss that. But before doing that, I will want you to be familiar with another and more advanced options that are available today. And those are called geophysical studies. Now, geophysical studies, what are these? These basically are something like using the physical properties of a rock, geophysical, and using those physical properties, basically finding out what is inside, right? Uh, these studies generally either are very limited or not at all taking or digging or going inside a rock surface or a ground surface. They basically work from ground surface or even aerial surveys, and they analyze these ground surfaces just from the top without digging anything on under, and but they can penetrate inside. The analysis can penetrate inside and find out the properties that are inside the ground surface. How this is done? This is basically done by using the properties of the rock itself. What kind of properties? Like uh, what is the suppose conductivity of a rock, electrical conductivity, or what is the resistivity of a rock, right? Or it can be like with if you pass a wave from one end to another, how fast the wave propagates in a rock. That can be one property, a physical property, right? Those are called either seismic waves or ultrasonic waves and so on. So different kinds of waves are there. Like there can be an analysis based on what it is emitting. Like there are naturally radioactive substances, right? Like potassium, oh sorry, uranium, yes, potassium as well, and thorium and so on. So if they are emitting something, we can use that as profiling media, right? Where it is and how much it is. There can be other ways like difference in the density of a rock. If there is a difference in the density, how it will affect some waves to propagate, or even gravity can be affected by the local density of the material, right? Magnetic forces. So if a iron rich area is there, that will certainly affect the magnetic profile of the area. So analyzing all these conditions, different using different basically high-tech equipments or reading equipments, and plotting it out with respect to physical horizontal distance, with respect to the vertical distance down, we can actually get a good idea of how the things are distributed inside. So this kind of analysis using the physical properties of the rock, that a rock is has these intrinsic properties, and using these properties, not at all going physical digging inside, and just using these properties, we get the values, or we get to know what's inside the ground surface. That kind of studies are covered in geophysical study criterias, or the geophysical study domains. So we'll see some of those. How what are these kind of studies? uh, where they're applicable, and so on. And these studies are very useful in the sense that where we cannot physically go and keep on digging that place or keep on coring or drilling that place, we can actually get a good amount of idea of how the geology or the underground rock formations are there based on these kind of analysis. Uh, for example, suppose we are planning to build a road in a very untouched virgin area where uh, it's full of forest, it's not at all approachable, and it's very tough basically to bring to go yourself. What to talk about bringing a whole drilling rig and going for a drilling operation? Because first we have to make sure that this area is feasible before we can build the roads and do the machinery work. So in those cases what they do is basically fly around, either go do a aerial survey using small aircrafts, or they can actually send a team that can go on foot and just put some sensors along the ground and actually find out what is below the ground just by the readings from these sensors. So a very useful study, a very interesting study, especially the kind of study which uses multi-dimensional aspect of knowledge. Like it also utilizes the physical aspects of rock, what are the elastic properties of the rock, what are the electrical properties of the rock, and so on, right? And it also uses the knowledge of waves, wave motion, and electrical conductivity, how the electricity flows, how it works, how the reflection of waves happen, and so on. So a very interesting field, uh, but used if used in a proper way, it can give us a good enough idea of what's inside. Uh, Again, since every aspect, every kind of analysis has its pros and its cons, this also has its pros and its cons. So we'll be discussing that. And let's start with this method. So one of the methods is to analyze the seismic waves that pass through. Uh, Seismic waves are those waves that we are generally aware when an earthquake happens, right? Can someone tell me what are the different kinds of seismic waves? Anyone has any idea? Raise
Yes,
hands.
sir. Hello, sir.
कौन है?
Prabhu,
Yeah,
sir.
Prabhu. Yeah, Prabhu, tell. Yeah.
Sir,
What kind of? Hmm.
mainly there are two types of waves: P
Right.
waves, that is primary wave, and secondary waves.
Okay.
Uh, the there are normally in seismograph, two
Hmm.
recordings are received. That is
Okay.
from body waves and from surface waves.
Right.
And the difference between P wave and S wave is recorded at what time interval it is. The time
Hmm.
interval between P wave reaching a P wave and reaching a S wave is recorded, and
Right.
that time interval is used to find and to locate the loci of the earthquake radius.
Awesome. Very,
Uh,
very good. Very nice
Using the
understanding.
3 or 4 seismographs, so we can exactly locate at
You can
what
exactly.
hypocenter is the earthquake generating.
Mhm. Perfect. So, Prabhu, I think summed up very well. Uh, so, there are two waves, as he said. There are body waves and there are surface waves. So, any kind of disturbance that happens inside the ground surface, that can create these two kinds of waves that goes through the body or the through the material of a material that is there, right? Those are called body waves that take care of that pass through full material that is involved, and some waves are there that travel only on the surface or a small portion near the surface. Those kinds of waves are called surface waves. So the primary waves and the secondary waves, or in short, they are called the P wave and the S waves. These waves are body waves. That travel through the body of the material, right? And on the surface, there are some more waves that are formed. There is L wave that is called love wave, based on the name of the person who discovered them. And there are relic waves that is again his name is based on the scientist who developed them, studied them. So all these four kinds of waves basically can be studied uh, when certain geological disturbances are there. But how to study these when there is no such activity that is going on, but we want to find out what kind of material is there. Now, why we are studying these seismic waves? Uh, each and every material, like what kind of rock is there based on what kind of strength it has, what kind of elasticity that material has, it basically dictates the speed in which these seismic waves travel through them. So, for example, uh, a mass of sandstone that is loosely grained or fine grained sandstone will have a velocity that is relatively less for these waves to travel than as a very highly compacted rock such as granite or suppose a basalt or granite, something like that, right? Sand or even limestone will have even lower values of that. And uh, if you understand how these waves propagation will change based on what kind of hardness, what kind of elastic modulus and Poisson's ratio, some of these properties basically directly affect the kind of velocities these waves can achieve when they pass through any material. So if we can if we can artificially induce these kind of seismic waves, we can actually record these at a certain distance, that how much time it took for these waves to pass on this material, and on the basis of that we can actually calculate the velocity, and in relation we can find out what kind of material that can be. So this is an indirect way of knowing or characterizing the material that is underground. So uh, a typical setup for these kind of analysis is something on this line. If I don't know if it is very clear, but let me zoom in. Uh, there are some receivers, some seismic receivers are there that are generally put on the surface of the ground, or in certain cases where the ground is not that stable or not that stiff, like a soil kind of ground or something. There are needle kind of structures that are there that can be dug inside, so that the receiver receives the vibrations properly, right? And at a known distance from from these sensors, an artificially induced vibration is created. Now, this kind of event, the vibration that is created, can be based on what kind of soil, what kind of material we are recording, how how far away the recordings are to be done, and what kind of intensity do we need for the analysis. So it can be as simple as striking a hammer on the ground. Seriously, people strike the hammer few a long big hammer few times, and whatever vibrations that are created by this hammer, they are basically recorded in terms of the ground waves, P wave, S wave, or the surface waves. Surface waves are not that prevalent when these artificial kind of seismic activities are induced, but ground waves certainly are, and these are recorded. And based on these kind of recordings, basically a back propagation map can be made, that how with what velocities basically they transferred. So uh, knowing the velocities, we can plot a velocity map. Uh, and on the bottom side, you can see how from this kind of seismic study, an S wave map is generated. So the S wave velocity in meter per second, these are given, and what we can see is that below a certain point, the S wave velocity has increased. So what this basically suggests that like for approximately 20 or 15 to 20 meters, the soil or the material that here that is present on the ground, it is having a lower material properties of density, lower material properties of strength, Young's modulus and all, while the same will be higher in terms when we go as depth increases. This we can interpret that based on these values. Now, all these studies need some referencing. So it is always good that a single borehole data or some other type of survey data is available at certain points. Like if we have a certain borehole data at any of the points here, we can basically cross check these values and then find out accurately what kind of material is there, right? Uh, as I was saying, all the materials are having some characteristic wave propagation velocities, right? So this also chart also suggests the same thing. This VP is basically pulse wave velocity. Pulse wave velocity is again a ground wave that is the primary wave, and it has the primary wave is generally faster. It is the wave that propagates in the direction of the motion of the particles propagate in the direction of the motion of the wave. So it is easier to pass through other materials like air, water as well. However, the S wave that we were discussing, that the particles basically oscillate perpendicular to the direction of the motion of the wave. So in that case, it cannot pass through liquids or gases because that kind of motion doesn't propagate that way, right? So only solids, the S wave passes. P wave passes to more materials, and correspondingly, we can actually find out what are the ranges of these. So as you saw, limestone has somewhere around 3,500 to 6,000 meter per second. A common igneous or a metamorphic rock will have even higher. Ultramagnetic rock or metamorphic rocks, some more hard rocks can have even higher values. So based on some known values as well as based on some known alternate survey methods, we can actually quite easily predict what kind of material is present inside. Uh, what's its advantages? A big positive for this is we can actually do repeated surveys, repeated analysis of these ground based on uh, to know what is the change in time. So suppose I don't know I've given it or not. Yeah. So this again, as we had for pulse wave velocity, we have something called shear wave velocity as well as S wave or the secondary wave. So for hard rocks, it can be greater than 1500 meter per second. And for soft soils, it can be as less than 180 meter per second. So when we basically, if we see with these materials, with these velocities in the first curve, we saw that how the top portion is just around like 250 somewhere, the blue portion, while the red portion is somewhere around 750, right? So then and we can convert those values to 750 or 760 can be in the rock category, while 250 or 300 can be in the category of soft soil or stiff soil, right? So in that sense, we can actually get a good idea of what we are working with. Again, these are not lone methods, or these are not the only methods that should be done. Like you cannot fully rely on just one method of these. So we have to basically back these methods up with certain other methods like core drilling or diamond drilling methods, so that we know actually what it is and then correlate it with the what we found here. This one actually was a study in one of my practical fields. This data basically shows a typical soil structure that has been stabilized in this region. So this was done for Kolkata High Court. There is a High Court building in Kolkata. If anyone is aware in that region, it's near Eden Garden, very close to Hooghly River, and one of the sides or one of the corners were basically liquidated or due to certain motions of certain water motions inside. So we had to basically stabilize that part, and we injected chemical grouts and we did a very scientific sort of stabilization work. And after that, we could see how the foundation was stabilized based on the S wave velocity that was done by MASW. So multi-channel analysis for seismic waves, MASW, and that's how we actually came to a basic understanding that okay, what we are working is basically taking effect. Initially, it was the S wave velocities were all on the green and blue zones, all in the zone type of 200 or 150 or 200. After our work, you can see it's basically increased to 400 on plus. So that was quite a good improvement, and that's what the aim of the full work was. So that was achieved. So these kind of analysis help in knowing what is going on, right? There are other methods apart from seismic method. There are electrical resistivity method. So here we basically take out the resistivity of the material. So bulk resistivity is also related to what kind of material it is, what kind of electrical properties there are, and we can actually correlate those with the material. So clay can have a lower resistivity. Basically, it is highly conductive, and weathered rocks can have higher resistivity. And in that sense, we can actually measure that. But again, this method is having some drawbacks. Uh, Basically, in terms of resistivity change, there are many other factors that also affect the resistivity change. For example, what kind of saturation is there in that material, right? And what kind of if there is any cave or any sort of a discontinuity that is there, right? And due to this, this sudden change or the change in the resistivity of these materials, we can actually find out certain desirable properties. Like, for example, in this curve, you see how with the depth, there are certain pockets that we can actually predict. So this one is a pocket of high resistance, very high resistance, and very high resistance will certainly mean something that is not conducting any electricity, and most probably that can be termed to voids or empty spaces. And in this case, it was a cave kind of a structure. Uh, there can be water pockets, so clay filled void and water pockets or sinkholes can be there. So those also can be detected. That will have lower resistance and higher electrical conductivity. So these kind of data can be obtained. Again, all these require some referencing, so some reference material have to be given to them in order to basically cross reference with, right? So this was electrical resistivity. There are very popular one is another technique called ground penetration radar. Now these radars basically work on the same principle like a normal radar, but the purpose of this is not to find what kind of material there is inside, but to find some anomalies in a material. Like if we suppose we want to find a pipeline that is going inside the ground, right? We want to construct some new building or something, and there are existing old pipelines, old cables that are maybe laid below the ground, and we want to know where they are going and so on. So for those purposes, as well as for the purposes of finding heavy materials that can actually reflect the radio waves very easily. Those can be done by doing the ground penetration radar work. These are simple equipment, handheld, like a trolley sort of. They can be taken up and moved around, and based on the kind of waves that are basically emitted from the emitter, and what are the receives, what it receives, we can actually predict what kind of material is there and where it is located. So for example, this kind of uh, the image that comes from a ground penetration radar, and you see the hyperbolic U-shaped, inverted U-shapes. Basically, these are the indicators of certain material that is present. So why these U-shapes are obtained? Because that kind of wave, basically, if it reflects from one point, it emits and expands, right? So in the receiver, it will basically, the first part of the inverted you will reach last, right? So it will be the inversion of U to C, U to the opposite U in that case. So that's how these kind of umbrellas are visible. And the point where these the material will be somewhere on the head of the umbrella. So where the umbrella starts or the hyperbola starts, there will be the main source or the object that is basically creating this reflection. So very useful study when we want to find out existing hard structures that are like pipelines and all. Uh, Many places the mining leases are actually cancelled due to the presence of previous excavations in terms of any lines that are there, any major oil rigs, the oil pipelines that are there, and so on. There was an example in Pakistan that was happening. That they were actually giving a mining, they were actually proposing a mining lease in an area where the main pipeline was connecting the oil pipeline with that region in certain area of Balochistan. One study was there. So that kind of studies, if you go for the ground penetration radar, that are easily sorted out. Then there are magnetic surveys. Magnetic surveys are based on the changes in the Earth magnetic field. Uh, as I was saying, there can be presence of more magnetic material nearby. So suppose in an iron ore rich area or an iron rich area, the magnetic fields that are generally basically quite regular at other places are actually distorted at these magnetic material places. So like iron, cobalt, and nickel, and other similar magnetic ores, magnetic materials can actually affect the magnetic field to a great extent. So these anomalies in the magnetic field can actually be detected using these magnetic surveys. So on the left, you can see what kind of manual surveys that are there, walking surveys that can be done, uh, uh, which has some two sensors, and it can basically detect how the magnetic field is changing with the movement in surface. So if there is a magnetic material presence, there will be certain change in the regular magnetic field that is there, right? And based on what kind of depth we have, like how deep the source of that magnetic anomaly is there, that kind of depression or the upliftment of that magnetic field will be visible. So some results or some idea you can get from the last on the right side, that the chart is there, right? So the magnetic field anomaly that is there, if there is any change in magnetic field, And with respect to depth, you can actually see how it affects. So a 1 kg iron will have a certain effect at lower depths. It will have a very high effect in magnetic field, and as the depth increases, it's the effect of the magnetic field is lower. Similarly, we can actually have some idea of what kind of change it is there, and on the basis of that, we can predict some prediction can be there that okay, there is a presence of some material that is magnetic and is affecting the local magnetic field. So very important in prospecting part as well as part of finding out some presence of iron, some presence of like even pipes and all can be found. Uh, this is another method based on finding the gravity, and changes in gravity basically occur a lot more than what we expect. Though we are very used to saying that the gravitational constant for gravity, acceleration due to gravity at any place can be 9.8 or 9.81, that is actually not true. Even you guys all have your mobiles, right? And most mobiles have these acceleratometers. You can actually open these acceleratometers and see there are apps that can show you what is the acceleration due to gravity at your place. And it can vary from a lot, like from 9.8 can be varying uh, like in both of the directions, positive and negative. And what basically decides or what basically affects is more of the what kind of density the ground material is made of, the local ground is made of. Uh, Variations can be also due to presence of anomaly, like suppose there is a vein of heavy density rock, right? Or a light density rock. Sorry, in this case, there is a heavy density rock, or sudden change in density of the material. So all these cases will actually dictate certain change in uh, gravity fields or the local gravity of that area. So these kind of portable gravity meters are there. They can actually directly be kept on the ground, and there are certain settings for each case, giving the latitude and longitude and so on. And they can actually find out what is the local acceleration due to gravity. If we can get a, difference or known this known change, we can actually predict what kind of density change there is. So if you have a knowledge of a local ground surface, suppose there is an abundance of sandstone, and there is a particular acceleration due to gravity that is there on the general region, and there is a certain notch, or there is a certain dip that is there, or there is a certain rise, there can be indication of vein kind of a structure, or certain presence of certain high or low density elements. So that is also a good analysis when we try to find out what kind of material we have inside. And finally, there is a radioactivity measurement, like gamma measurement. So in terms of radioactivity, these materials like potassium, thorium, and uranium, basically they can emit certain amount of gamma particles, and they can be actually detected. Uh, these gamma particles, gamma rays are basically high energy waves, but uh, so the penetration will be depending on the high energy. So more penetration can be seen relatively, and these uranium, thorium, and potassium can be basically detected by these methods. Not very much useful in our case, but because we were listing them out, so they were there. There are more methods, but we'll restrict to this knowledge only. So these were various geophysical methods. Uh, Let's stop here. We are already 1 minute late. So if anyone has any questions, you can have them. Otherwise, let's stop here. We'll continue this. What kind of field studies are there for slope stability analysis in future as well? Now we'll move on to what kind of analysis we can do for example, like drilling work and all. So we'll take care of that in the next class. And yeah, let's discuss then next, like when it is on Thursday, right? So let's discuss those on Thursday then. Okay, you can join your next class now. Thank you very much. We'll see you all in the computer applications class. Thank you.